Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad you could be with me today. And if you've been with me the past several episodes, you know that I've been working my way through a session. Actually, it's session 26 from the Power of Purity podcast. And the title of the session is Why You've Struggled So Much with Sex. And the thesis is this: when you understand the very unhealthy way that your sexuality developed, you'll understand why you've struggled so much with sex. And I don't want to take too much time in the way of review, but I believe that this session can help a man understand himself better than he's ever understood himself before, and understand, as the title says, why he struggled so much with the issue of sex in his life. And we've talked about how all these bad ingredients get put into a boy's life, into the cake mix of his sexual self as he's advancing through puberty, and how this affects him. And then as this boy transitions into a man, these things that have been embedded into him kind of follow him. And I've identified these 10 steps that I think are a kind of template that unfold in so many guys' lives. And I know all 10 of these were part of my life and story and contributed to this massive, unbelievable struggle that I had with the issue of sex. And I believe these 10 steps are kind of a template that help so many guys understand themselves. And in the last episode, we covered the first 6 steps of those 10. Number 1 was discovery. Every boy at some point discovers his penis, masturbation, ejaculation, and orgasm. Step 2 is repetition. He quickly learns that this intense, unbelievable, pleasurable, euphoric sensation that he's discovered can be replicated over and over and over again. So he begins this process of repetition. That leads to step 3, which is habit. Through repetition, a habit becomes firmly established in his life, the habit of masturbation, which I struggled with for years and years and years in my life, and I've learned is very common for men, that so many of us have struggled with the habit of masturbation. Through habit, then, step 4, a kind of sexual rhythm is established in our lives. That leads to step 5, a growing sexual appetite. We learn that everybody, albeit unconsciously so, we all know the language of our body. Our body talks to us all the time. Our body tells us what it wants. Hey, I'm hungry. Hey, I'm tired. Hey, I've got to go to the bathroom. Hey, I'm full. Quit eating. And I would advocate that the sexual appetite becomes, if not the most powerful appetite of a man's body, one of the most powerful, and a man typically learns to serve or to feed this sexual appetite in the same way he feeds his physical appetite for food. And so through the establishment of sexual appetite, then the 6th step is fantasy. At some point, his mind becomes involved, you see. So now his sexual self isn't oriented just in the physical body, but it's actually a kind of transference or transition into his mind. And it isn't just what's going on in his body now, but what's going on in his mind. And we learned that the mind, the brain, is the biggest sex organ in the human body for most men. It's what we think about. And that leads us then to step 7, where we're going to pick up and continue today. And step 7 is compulsion. Compulsion is defined as an irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, especially against one's conscious wishes. Compulsive behavior is defined as a psychological condition in which a person does a behavior compulsively, having an overwhelming feeling that they must do so. Guys, can you relate to this concept of compulsion? That our sexual self, our sexual expression and activity, we often become compulsive. It's gaining power and authority through the escalation of these different steps. It's becoming more and more powerful, and for most of us, we come to the place where we're now being compelled by our sexual self. It's at this point that a kind of line is being crossed from what might be considered normal, healthy, appropriate sexual behavior to sexual behavior that is becoming abnormal, unhealthy, or inappropriate. It's at this point of compulsion, you see, that a person is no longer controlling sex and his orgasm, but he's beginning to be controlled by sex and his orgasm. Do you guys remember, if you heard my story in the early episodes of the podcast, I believe that I made it to step 7 very, very early as a boy. By the age of 11 or 12, definitely by the age of 13, compulsion was becoming locked into my life and my sexual self. I told you guys that story, A Risk to Peak, where I wanted to see my father's pornography so bad I couldn't stand not to look at it. But my problem was my mother was at home, so I figured out when she would go downstairs to do the laundry, I could sneak and peek even though my mom was at home. You see, I was learning already to take risk with my sexual self, or said another way, compulsion. I was being compelled by my sexual gift now. You see, sex is beginning to control me. It's beginning to boss me around. It's compelling me to do things, even when my common sense is telling me, Tony, you better not do this. You might get caught. God doesn't want you to do this. But see, once we get to the place of compulsion, guys, I would advocate that we're getting in big trouble. Well, again, the definition of compulsion is an irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, especially against one's conscious wishes. 2 observations about this definition of compulsion. Number 1, notice that it involves an irresistible urge, it says, which makes sense, right? That means that the urge can no longer be resisted. Thus, that's why it's called irresistible. I mean, you can't resist it anymore. It's stronger than you. And number 2, it involves an aspect in which a person's beginning to act in violation of their very own conscience. You see, it says that this irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, especially against one's conscious wishes. In other words, you literally consciously are thinking, I don't want to do this. I better not do this. I might get in trouble. What if I get caught? I know God doesn't want me to. But you're beginning to act in violation of your very own consciousness or your very own conscience. Man, when we get to that point, we're in pretty big trouble, because at this point now, you see, we're crossing a line where we are no longer controlling sex, and sex is gaining power and an authority in our soul now where it is controlling us. Part of my ministry, you guys, I think maybe I've shared it before, but I have this prison ministry that's kind of amazing. God opened up these doors that we never expected to be opened, and I was invited to come into a prison in the state of Missouri, in Bowling Green, Missouri, Northeast Correctional Center. There's 2,400 inmates incarcerated there, men. And we were invited to go in and do our Power of Purity conference there. And I did a Power of Purity conference over a period of 8 weeks. We went every Sunday night for an hour-and-a-half session. We had about 100 inmates in attendance. and it was a home run. It was absolutely powerful and amazing the way God moved in those meetings, and a lot of men were deeply touched. And what was amazing, at the end of 8 weeks, we left and we were praising God. We never thought we'd get to go into a prison. It was an amazing opportunity that God opened these doors, and we thought we were done. But a couple months later, my phone rings one day, and it was a very high-ranking official from the state of Missouri. And he basically says, Tony, we heard about your ministry. We heard about the meetings you had at Bowling Green. We heard about the response of the inmates. And we want to know, will you bring your program into every prison in the state of Missouri? And there's 22 prisons in the state, 20 for men and 2 for women. So about, I'd have to figure it out, but for the past 5 or 6 years now, we've been going in and out of the prisons around the state of Missouri, doing the Power of Purity conference, presenting these different sessions and trying to help these folks. And the point I'm getting to, you guys, in that prison, Bowling Green, there's 2,400 men incarcerated, and over 65% of those men are incarcerated for sexual offenses. Can you imagine? This means that these men have acted out sexually in such a way, such an unacceptable way, that the collective conscience of our society has determined, dude, if you do that, if you act like that, we're not even going to let you live in a free society with us. We can't even trust you to live among us, to walk around and be free. We're going to actually lock you up in a room with bars because you can't do the things that you've been doing with sex. So the issue of sex has deeply, radically, profoundly impacted these guys and their lives and the trajectory of their lives. But the point I'm getting to, guys, is this. Okay, my question is this. How many of these men at Northeast Correctional Center, how many of these men do you think they knew that the thing that they were about to do with sex was very wrong? And they probably knew that they shouldn't do it, and that if they get caught, they're going to get in real big trouble, and yet they went ahead and they did the thing anyway. And I'd advocate that virtually every one of them, without exception, knew that this particular sexual behavior that they were about to engage in was wrong, it was inappropriate, it was unacceptable, and yet they went right ahead and they did it anyway. And why did they do it, guys? Why did they do it? Because of step number 7, compulsion. Because you see, it's at this point that these men were being compelled by an irresistible urge to do a certain thing that even though their own conscience was telling them, this is wrong, you better not do it, gentlemen, I'd suggest that we're in big trouble when we get to the place where the sexual energy that lives in us is becoming so powerful that it's compelling us now to act in certain ways, even against our own conscience. God forbid. Let me give you a few examples. Thank God I was never incarcerated because of my sexual offenses. I trust that most of the guys listening to this podcast have never come to that point where you've been incarcerated. But it doesn't mean that we're any less compelled than even many of the guys that have been incarcerated. For example, a Christian man knows that he should not be looking at pornography on the internet, yet he simply cannot control the urge to look. And not only that, but his habit is seriously escalating as he spends more and more and more time looking at porn. You see, it's compulsion at this point. He knows he shouldn't do it. He don't want to do it. He knows God doesn't want him to do it. He knows he'd be in big trouble if his wife caught him, and yet he's compelled to do it, so he keeps doing it. Another man is acting out against his very own conscience as he regularly scans the Craigslist personal ads in pursuit of homosexual chats and experiences. Okay, he's never personally had a real, live homosexual experience with another person, but he has this fantasy, and so he's going on Craigslist, and he's pretending like he's acting like he's homosexual, and he's having these homosexual chats, you see, with other people. He says, I love my wife. I'd never want to hurt my wife. He knows that what he's doing is wrong. It's dishonoring and displeasing to God. God would not want him to do this. Yet he's powerless to resist the overwhelming urge that seems to be almost constantly calling him to do this. Another Christian man frequently dresses in his wife's undergarments and clothing. This has become a very erotic experience for him, and it virtually always culminates with masturbation. After he acts out, he struggles with a deep sense of shame, and he's begged God to help him stop doing this. He'd be horrified if anybody ever found out about his clandestine activities. If his friends, if his wife found out, if people at church found out. And yet, even though he knows he shouldn't do it, he can't stop because of step number 7. You see, he's reached the place of compulsion. He's being compelled. You see, in each of these situations, the men involved, they don't want to be doing the things they're doing. They know it's wrong. They know God doesn't want them to do it. They know they'd be in big trouble by their wife if they got caught. And when they act out, they're doing so often in violation of their very own conscience. Yet in each of these situations, men are being compelled. They're struggling with this irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, even against their own conscience. It's at this point that they're no longer controlling sex, and sex is now controlling them. And they're continuously compelled to do the very things they know they should not be doing. And in conclusion of this step 7, I just asked you guys, can you relate to this? Guys, can you relate to being compelled with the sexual energy that lives in you, where the urge, the desire, the instinct is so powerful in you that even when you don't want to do it, even though you know you shouldn't do it, you do it anyway? Well, dude, you're at step 7, compulsion. And that leads to step 8, which I call self-medication. It's kind of the next stepping stone or component. Self-medication is another expression of sex that's being used in a way that sex was never intended to be used. Said another way, self-medication is an expression of sexual behavior that's unhealthy and inappropriate. And by the way, self-medication is defined as a human behavior in which an individual uses a substance or any exogenous influence, that means something outside of himself, to self-administer treatment for non-clinical physical or psychological ailments, okay? And by the way, if you'd like to learn more about specifically this step 8 self-medication, if you listen to session number 4 in the Power of Purity Conference, it's entitled Emotional Equilibrium. And that's what I really focus on in that session of the Power of Purity Conference. I'm trying to help a guy understand how, dude, we're using sex in an unhealthy way, a way it was never intended to be used. You see, we're using sex to self-medicate in the same way people use drugs or gambling or alcohol. You see, for me, my orgasm became my drug of choice, and I would self-medicate with my orgasm. Although the substances and activities that can be used to self-medicate are almost limitless, right? Including things like chocolate, shopping, television, gambling, golfing, even religion. Self-medication is essentially a person's attempt to soothe or escape unpleasant feelings or circumstances in their life by using some form of substance or activity. The point, guys, for our purpose here is to recognize that for many men, And I might even suggest that for most men, their primary drug of choice in life becomes their orgasm. That's what we use to self-medicate. In other words, men use their orgasm in the attempt to soothe or escape unpleasant feelings or circumstances in their life. If you're angry, masturbate. You're tired, masturbate. You feel confused, masturbate. You're frustrated, lonely, sad, depressed. You see, my natural response was to seek a sexual experience and or an orgasm because this became my primary method of attempting to comfort myself emotionally from the pain and confusion of life. My primary way, in the verbiage of the recovery community, of trading my FB, my feel bad, for my FG, which is my feel good. And I have no doubt that that's how I learned to use my orgasm. In this way, you see, my sexuality and my orgasm became a very powerful drug to me, is they moved to the epicenter of my emotional self and became the primary coping mechanism of my life. And that leads to step 9, which I call acting out. Wikipedia defines acting out, and it says that it's a psychological term meaning to perform an action in contrast to bearing and managing the impulse to perform it. The acting done is usually antisocial and may take the form of acting on the impulses of an addiction. In general usage, the action performed is destructive to self or others and may inhibit the development of more constructive responses to the feelings in question. The term is used in this way in sexual addiction treatment, psychotherapy, criminology, and parenting. You see, acting out implies a kind of escalation of behavior as a person seeks to serve and satisfy their growing sexual appetite. It also implies the concept of tolerance, right? Which is the idea that I need more and more and more of my particular drug in order to achieve the same high that I used to achieve with a lesser amount of acting out. Acting out, we might say, involves the next step. I like this concept of the next step. The next step, you see, that a person takes. They're taking this action upon the desires and impulses that are compelling them to do so. And so, how did I act out? You guys heard my story, right? My acting out included masturbation, internet pornography. Guys, I went to strip clubs on occasion. I became involved in several adulterous affairs. You see, through the escalation of these steps, sex is becoming more and more powerful. So inevitably, you're going to begin to act out. What Jesus said, right? What comes out of us comes from our heart. It lives inside of you. So inevitably, it's going to start seeping out to the outside of you. So guys masturbate. They become involved in internet porn. They go on Craigslist. They go in chat rooms. They have phone sex. They go to strip clubs. They get sex massages. They want multiple partners. They want an open marriage. They have affairs. They use prostitutes. They become involved in orgies. They're interested in BDSM, child molestation for some men, paraphilias, rape. These are all various possibilities of acting out in different ways that men begin to act out sexually. And that leads us to the 10th and final step, which I call addiction, sexual addiction. By the way, in conclusion of that ninth point, I might just ask you guys, can you relate to acting out? Do you act out sexually? Do you do things that you know you shouldn't do, and yet you're acting out? Well, step 10 is addiction. The National Institute of Drug Abuse defines addiction. It says, when a drug user can't stop taking a drug, even if he wants to stop, it's called addiction. The urge is too strong to control, even if you know the drug is causing you harm. I have 3 definitions of addiction here that I want to share with you. Webster's says that an addict is a person who devotes or surrenders themselves to something habitually or obsessively. My own personal definition, kind of a kindergarten definition, is when something controls me instead of me controlling it. I believe I'm an addict at that point. I'm addicted to that thing because it controls me and I can't control it. And number 3 is the Bible definition. And if I had to prove or choose as a proof text, I believe 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12 is kind of the Bible definition of what addiction is. The Apostle Paul says, everything's permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything's permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. You see, addiction is when something has mastered you. That means it controls you. It has authority over you. It has power over you. It is your magistrate, your potentate. It has influence, jurisdiction. It has a power or a strength over you. It is your master, which means you are the slave. And 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19 says that a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. So in conclusion of these 10 steps, you guys, I want to share with you several observations concerning these 10 steps. But you know what I think I'm going to do? Because I'm closing in on my 30-minute mark, I think what I'll go ahead and do is wrap up this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad that you guys are able to be with me, and I hope that these 10 steps are very helpful. I hope they're a kind of mirror that's helping you see yourself and understand yourself better than you ever have. And in the verbiage of the title of this session, Session 26 from the Power of Purity conference, that it's helping you understand why sex has held so much power over you, why you've struggled so much with sex. Discovery, repetition, habit, sexual rhythm, sexual appetite, fantasy, compulsion, self-medication, acting out, and addiction. Those are the 10 steps, you guys. And by the way, as I wrap up, I just want to say something, and that is that what I'm sharing with you guys in this session, why you've struggled so much with sex, it's literally taken from the Power of Purity Conference, Session 26. So if this content, this material has been helpful and encouraging or insightful, if it's helping you, you see, deal with the issue of sex, it's helping you understand yourself better than you ever have before. It's helping you grow. I pray to God that it's helping somebody who's listening. But the point I want to get to, you guys, is that this is just one session from the conference, Session 26. I have 30 sessions in the conference right now. The conference consists of over 23 hours of teaching just like this that's going to help you and empower you to experience your sexual gift in a healthier way than you ever have before. It's going to help you learn to bring your sexual gift finally under the authority of God and the authority of Christ. It's going to help you manage yourself sexually in a better way than ever before. It's going to help you honor your wife with your sexual gift if you're married. So I just want to suggest that this is an example of the conference, you guys. And the conference is there. It's 30 sessions, and it's designed to help a man be healthier sexually. So if you haven't checked it out, go to the Power of Purity website, www.powerofpurity.org. All 30 sessions are there. You can listen to the first 2 sessions for free, And then the next 28 sessions are there. I'm offering them right now at a special price of $24.99, just to try to help fund the ministry a little bit. And if you don't even want to invest in the whole conference, what you can do is you can purchase any single session that looks of interest to you for $1.29. So I don't know how I could offer it any more practically than I am, and I really encourage you guys to take advantage of this material. I've put my heart, my soul, my passion into this, and it's my hope and my heart and my prayer that God can use everything that I've been through and everything that God has been teaching me to help others. So take advantage of the conference, you guys, and I might even encourage you. I said a few episodes, get a few brothers together, start a Power of Purity group, buy this conference for $24.99, and then get 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 15 brothers, and once a week listen to one of these sessions and then talk about it. And that'd give you 30 weeks right there. You'd have a group for 30 weeks. And I'm telling you, we're talking about changing men's hearts and lives, you guys. So it's there. Use it. Take advantage of it and help a brother. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. God bless you. I'm very glad you were with me in this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in our next podcast. God bless.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.